everyone, welcome back. It feels like everywhere you turn these days, everyone's talking about AI. But behind all the hype, there's a whole other story unfolding, and it's got some serious legal drama.
Yeah, things are definitely heating up in the legal world when it comes to AI.
So that's exactly what we're going to be diving into today. AI's legal battle. Specifically, we're looking at this Forbes article by Max Lai called AI's Legal Storm: The Three Battles That Will Shape Its Future. And basically, it breaks down these legal fights into three main categories, right? Intellectual property, privacy, and then ethical liability. What I find so fascinating about this is how much these cases could actually end up changing, like our daily lives, the music we listen to, the photos we see online, even the news.
It really highlights how AI isn't some far-off thing anymore. It's already woven into the fabric of our lives, and now the legal system is trying to figure out, well, how to deal with that.
Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's zoom out for a sec. Can you give us, like, the historical context here? Are there any parallels between what's happening now with AI and, say, the early days of the internet?
Well, the article draws a pretty interesting comparison to the Napster era. Remember all that?
Oh, yeah. Free music everywhere. What a time.
Right. But it led to a ton of copyright lawsuits, which ultimately shut Napster down, and then we saw the rise of paid, centralized platforms like iTunes and Spotify.
Interesting. So you're saying, like, AI could be facing a similar moment of reckoning. Like, these legal challenges could force a huge shift in the whole industry.
Absolutely. Think about it. Napster's downfall set a precedent for how we own and share digital content. We could see similar precedents being set now with AI.
That's pretty mind-blowing. All right, let's dive into the first battleground: intellectual property. I think this is one that hits close to home for a lot of us, especially with all these new AI tools that can, like, generate images and text. The big question is, if you train an AI on, let's say, 1 million copyrighted books, who owns the stuff it spits out?
That's a huge question. And we're seeing it play out right now with the Getty Images lawsuit against Stability AI. Getty is claiming that Stability basically stole its copyrighted images to train its AI image generator. Stable Diffusion, I think it's called.
So basically, using someone's image to train AI could be seen as, like, a copyright violation.
That's Getty's argument, and it could have massive implications for the whole AI industry. And we're seeing similar lawsuits popping up, against companies like OpenAI and Meta for supposedly using pirated books to train their models.
Wow. So if content creators win these lawsuits, does that mean AI companies would have to, like, license all their training data?
That's a real possibility. And of course, that would get very expensive very quickly. It could definitely slow down innovation.
It makes you wonder, like, how much stuff on the internet is being used to train AI without anyone even knowing?
It's a valid concern. The legal system is basically playing catch-up, trying to figure out where the lines are when it comes to AI and copyright.
Right, right. Speaking of lines, let's move on to the next legal battleground: privacy and data protection. It feels like AI is collecting our data everywhere we go these days. What are we seeing in terms of, like, how regulators and people are responding to that?
Well, there's definitely growing concern about how AI is using our personal information, especially with things like facial recognition technology. Clearview AI, for example, they've been hit with some hefty fines for scraping people's images from the internet without consent. I think the Dutch Data Protection Authority fined them like 30.5 million euros.
Whoa, that's a lot of money. What about other companies, though? Is this just like a one-off thing?
It seems like a trend is emerging. Italy just fined OpenAI 15 million euros for violating GDPR, unauthorized data processing, insufficient age verification, that sort of thing.
So GDPR is playing a big role here. Just for those who might not know, GDPR is the EU's data privacy law, and it's kind of becoming the gold standard for how companies need to approach data collection and consent.
Absolutely. And these fines are sending a clear message that stricter privacy regulations are coming. Companies are going to have to get explicit consent before they can just use people's data to train AI.
Okay, so this is a tricky one, right? Because on the one hand, tougher privacy laws would obviously protect our data. But on the other hand, it could also slow down AI development, right?
That's the dilemma. Do we prioritize privacy or progress? It's a trade-off that we as a society are going to have to grapple with.
Tough questions for sure. Okay, let's move on to the final battleground, and arguably the one that's the most ethically charged: AI ethics and liability. It seems like every other day there's a story about AI making some big mistake. The question is, when AI messes up, who's to blame?
Right, that's the million-dollar question. And it's one that the courts are going to have to answer more and more. We've already seen some pretty high-profile cases that raise these concerns. For instance, Google's Gemini AI. It generated some historically inaccurate images, like portraying historical figures with the wrong race, which led to accusations of bias and misinformation.
Yeah, that was a big one. It makes you wonder, like, how much of the AI out there is being trained on data that's just, like, straight up wrong or biased?
It's definitely a concern. And there was that case of an Australian mayor who was thinking about suing OpenAI because ChatGPT falsely accused him of bribery. Talk about AI-generated defamation.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. So what can be done? I mean, how do we prevent AI from, like, spreading lies and ruining people's lives?
Well, we need stronger liability laws.
Yeah.
Companies need to be held responsible for the actions of their AI systems.
Yeah.
And that means prioritizing fairness and transparency from the very beginning of the development process.
But isn't there a risk that, if we regulate AI too heavily, it'll stifle innovation? It's a tough balance to strike.
It is. The challenge is finding that sweet spot where we encourage ethical AI development without, like, totally squashing its potential.
So we've painted a pretty bleak picture so far, all these legal challenges, ethical dilemmas. Is there any hope? Is there anything out there that could offer a solution to all this?
There might be. The article points towards this really interesting concept called decentralized AI, or DAI.
DAI. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, DAI basically uses blockchain technology to make data collection and processing more transparent and accountable. It's very different from the centralized AI models that are, like, dominating the industry now.
Blockchain. Okay, so, like, the technology behind cryptocurrency, I'm familiar with the term, but I'll be honest, I don't fully understand how that would apply to AI. What problems would it solve?
It's kind of revolutionary. Imagine a system where instead of one company controlling all the data, that data is spread across a network of users. That's the core idea behind DAI.
Instead of, like, giant server farms, the data is out there, distributed among tons of people. I've never thought about it that way. But, okay, so how would that actually work, and how would it address these legal challenges we've been talking about?
Well, let's start with the intellectual property issue. A blockchain is basically this giant unchangeable ledger. Every piece of data that's added to it, every transaction, it's permanently and publicly recorded. So in a DAI system, if someone contributes data to train an AI, that contribution is logged on the blockchain for everyone to see.
So it's like this, like, super transparent record of where the data came from. That's pretty clever. It would be a lot harder to sneak copyrighted stuff into an AI's training data without anyone noticing.
Exactly. And because it's a decentralized network, not controlled by one single company, there's less risk of, one entity abusing its power or hoarding all the data.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Sounds like DAI could really level the playing field and give more power back to individuals. This is fascinating. Tell me more.
Well, DAI doesn't stop at intellectual property. It could also be a game changer for privacy.
Okay, I'm all ears. How would DAI improve privacy when it comes to AI?
Well, think about all the data we generate every single day. Our searches online, our social media posts, our location data. With DAI, instead of this data being automatically scooped up by, the big tech companies, you as the user would actually have the power to choose what you share and for what purpose.
So I'm in control. I decide what data goes into the network. But would I be constantly getting, like, pop-ups asking for permission? That sounds annoying.
Not necessarily. DAI could use something called differential privacy. It's basically where your data is anonymized and then kind of blended in with data from other users. So it's harder to identify individual contributions. You'd still be contributing to the network, but your personal info wouldn't be, like, directly exposed.
Interesting. So it's about finding a balance between using data to train AI and protecting people's privacy.
Exactly. It's a balance that's definitely missing right now.
All right, let's talk about another big issue with AI bias. We see it all the time, right? Facial recognition systems that are more likely to misidentify people of color, hiring algorithms that discriminate against women. How would DAI tackle this problem?
Well, as we've said, biased data leads to biased AI. But with DAI, the data comes from a much wider, more diverse pool of people. Imagine a global network of individuals contributing data, all different backgrounds and experiences.
Yeah, that makes sense. A more diverse data set should, in theory, lead to less biased AI systems. But diversity alone isn't a magic bullet, right?
Definitely not. We also have to think about how AI models are designed and trained. And that's where the community-driven aspect of DAI comes in.
Okay, tell me more about that. How does DAI involve the community in, like, addressing bias?
It's not just about contributing data. The community is actually involved in auditing and refining the AI models themselves. That means more people can weigh in, more perspectives, more chances to catch potential biases.
So it's like crowdsourcing the ethical considerations of AI instead of leaving it all up to a few engineers at a company.
Exactly. And that's what makes DAI so powerful. It democratizes the whole process of AI development.
Okay, this is all starting to sound pretty amazing. But is DAI just a theory? Are there any actual examples of this in action?
There are some pretty exciting projects in the works. There's Ocean Protocol, which is a platform for creating data marketplaces where people can securely share and, even make money from their data. And there's SingularityNet, which is building a decentralized marketplace for AI services.
Cool. So those are like platforms that allow developers to tap into data and algorithms from a much wider community. But can these decentralized systems really handle the massive amounts of data needed to train like really complex AI models? That seems like a big challenge.
It is. Scaling these systems is definitely one of the biggest hurdles. But there are some promising approaches being explored, like federated learning.
Federated learning, what's that?
Basically, instead of bringing all the data to the model, you bring the model to the data. It's trained on data that's spread across tons of devices without actually bringing it all together in one place.
That's pretty clever.
Right. And it really shows how DAI is pushing the boundaries, forcing us to rethink how we develop AI.
It seems like DAI has the potential to be like a total game changer, but it's still pretty early days, right? I mean, what are some of the potential downsides, the risks?
Well, governance in a decentralized system can be tricky. If there's no central authority, how do you make sure decisions are made fairly?
It's like creating a digital democracy for AI.
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of security. Decentralized systems can be vulnerable to attacks if they're not designed carefully.
So security is super important. If the data is spread across a whole network, you have to make sure it's protected.
Absolutely. Developers are using advanced cryptography and consensus mechanisms to secure the network, make sure everything is legit.
It's like building this massive digital fortress around the data. Okay, so this is all really fascinating stuff. DAI seems to have a ton of potential, but it's clear there are still a lot of challenges to overcome.
Definitely. It's still very early days. We're just starting to scratch the surface of what DAI could be.
It's so exciting, though, to see this kind of innovation happening. People pushing the boundaries, exploring new solutions to these huge ethical and legal questions.
I agree. DAI represents a real shift in how we think about AI. It's a move toward a more human-centered approach, a vision of AI that's not just powerful, but also fair and transparent.
It's a vision I can definitely get behind. But I'm curious, how does this all relate back to the legal battles we talked about earlier? Could DAI actually play a role in how those lawsuits play out?
It's possible. DAI could offer a way to address some of the thorniest issues, like data ownership and copyright.
So instead of courts having to decide who owns what, DAI could create a system where ownership is clear from the get-go.
Exactly. And if it can prove itself, show that it can actually reduce bias and increase accountability, it could lead to laws and regulations that actually encourage this kind of development.
It's amazing to think that this technology, which is still so new, could have such a huge impact on the future of AI, both legally and ethically.
It definitely has the potential. Of course, we'll have to wait and see how it all unfolds, but the conversations we're having now are incredibly important. They're going to shape the future of AI and make sure it benefits everyone, not just a select few.
Well, we've covered a ton of ground today, from the legal storms brewing around AI to this whole idea of decentralized solutions. As we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
I think the key is that the future of AI is not set in stone. We're at a crossroads, and the decisions we make today as individuals, as consumers, as a society are going to determine which path AI takes.
It's not just about watching this unfold, it's about actively participating and making our voices heard.
Exactly. By staying informed, by asking questions, by getting involved in these conversations, we can help steer AI in a direction that benefits all of humanity.
That's a great note to end on. This has been an awesome conversation, and I've learned so much about the complexities of AI, but also the incredible potential of DAI. We'll be back soon to dive even deeper into this fascinating world, so stay tuned.
So let's get a picture of this DAI thing in action. Imagine you're using like an AI-powered tool to, say, compose music.
Yeah.
In a DAI system, all that raw material, like the melodies, the harmonies, the rhythms, it might come from this huge network of musicians all over the world who have like opted in to share their work.
Okay, yeah, I see. So it's not a company like scraping data from the web. It's getting it directly from people who are like actively participating. That makes sense.
Right. And that's where the blockchain comes in. Every contribution is recorded, so you have this permanent, unchangeable record of who provided what. So, like, if your AI-generated melody ends up sounding a lot like, I don't know, some famous composer's work, you can actually trace it back to the original source.
Ah, so it's like this built-in protection against copyright infringement. That's huge for artists, especially with all the worries about AI just, ripping off people's work.
Definitely. And for users, it means transparency, which is something we really don't have with centralized AI models. Imagine, like, being able to trace the origin of every piece of data your smart speaker uses to answer your questions. You'd know for sure that nothing is being lifted from copyrighted material without permission.
Yeah, that would be a game changer. It would make me feel a lot better about using AI, knowing where the information's coming from. But let's shift gears for a minute. We've talked about intellectual property, but what about privacy? You mentioned that DAI could offer more privacy. Can you explain that a little more?
Sure. I mean, think about how much data we generate every single day, right? Online searches, social media activity, location data. With DAI, instead of all that data just being like automatically sucked up by these big tech companies, you, the user, you actually get to choose what you share and how it's used.
So I'm in control. I decide what data I'm putting out there. But wouldn't that mean I'm constantly getting bombarded with pop-ups asking for my permission? That would get old fast.
Not necessarily. DAI could utilize something called differential privacy.
Yeah.
It basically anonymizes your data and then mixes it with other people's data. So it becomes really hard to identify any individual's contributions. You're still contributing to the network, but your personal information isn't directly exposed.
Okay, that makes sense. It addresses the privacy concerns without cutting off the flow of data that's needed to, to train these AI models.
Exactly. It strikes a balance.
All right, let's move on to another big one. Bias. We see it all the time with AI, right? Like facial recognition systems that are more likely to misidentify people of color or hiring algorithms that discriminate against women. How would DAI address this?
Well, we've talked about how biased data leads to biased AI. But with DAI, because the data pool is so much bigger and, more importantly, more diverse, it's less likely that the AI will inherit those biases. Imagine people from all over the world contributing data, all different backgrounds, all different experiences.
Yeah, so the data itself is more representative of the real world. That should help, right? But I mean, diversity alone doesn't guarantee an unbiased AI, does it?
No, you're absolutely right. We also need to look at how those AI models are designed and trained. And that's another place where the community aspect of DAI is really important.
Okay, I'm following you. So how does DAI involve the community in making sure the AI isn't biased?
Well, in a DAI system, the community isn't just providing data. They're also involved in actually auditing and refining the models themselves. So you have a much wider range of perspectives that can help spot potential biases or, raise ethical concerns.
Ah, so it's like having a whole bunch of eyes on the problem instead of just a few.
Yeah.
It makes the development process a lot more transparent and hopefully less prone to bias.
Exactly. And that's what makes DAI so powerful.
This is all starting to sound really impressive, but is it just theoretical? I mean, are there any real-world examples of DAI actually being used?
Oh, yeah. There's some really cool projects out there. There's Ocean Protocol, which is creating a marketplace for data where people can share and monetize their data securely. And then there's SingularityNet, which is building a decentralized marketplace for AI services.
Wow. Okay, so those are platforms where, developers can access data and algorithms from a global community. It's fostering collaboration and innovation. But, can these decentralized systems really handle the sheer volume of data that's needed to train complex AI models? I mean, that's got to be a huge challenge.
It is. Scaling these systems up is one of the biggest hurdles, for sure. But there are some really interesting approaches being explored, like federated learning.
Federated learning, what is that?
It's pretty clever, actually. Instead of bringing all the data to the model, you basically bring the model to the data. So it's trained on data that's spread across lots of different devices without actually having to centralize it.
Oh, wow. That is clever.
Right. It shows how DAI is really changing the game, forcing us to think differently about how we develop AI.
Okay, DAI seems like it has incredible potential, but like any new technology, there are going to be some downsides, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the risks that we should be aware of?
Well, one of the big ones is governance. When you have a decentralized system, it can be tough to figure out how to make decisions fairly. If there's no central authority, who's in charge?
Yeah, it's like trying to create a democracy for AI.
Exactly. And then there's security. Decentralized systems, if they're not designed really carefully, can be more vulnerable to, like, cyber attacks.
So security is paramount. If you've got data spread across an entire network, you absolutely have to make sure that it's protected.
Right. And developers are very aware of that. They're using things like, advanced cryptography, these consensus mechanisms to secure the network and make sure all the transactions are legitimate.
It's like building this massive, impenetrable fortress around the data. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. DAI has a ton of potential, but there are definitely some challenges that still need to be addressed.
For sure. It's still early days, but it's exciting to see this kind of innovation happening.
It really is. It's like people are like taking these massive ethical and legal questions and saying, okay, we need new solutions. We need to think outside the box. It's inspiring.
It really is. And it shows that the future of AI is not, like, preordained. It's something we're actively shaping right now.
That's a great point. And with that, I think it's a good place to take a little break. We'll be back in a few minutes to dive even deeper into DAI and explore some of the even bigger questions about what it means for the future of AI and for all of us. Stay tuned. Okay, so we're back, and I have to say, I'm like really fascinated by this whole DAI thing. But I'm curious, is it like the ultimate solution to all the AI challenges we've been talking about, or are there like other paths forward that we haven't even considered yet?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? DAI definitely offers this, like, really compelling vision, but it's important to remember that it's just one path. There might be other solutions out there that we haven't even thought of yet.
So we shouldn't think of DAI as like a magic bullet. It's more like one tool, one approach among many.
Right. There's no, like, one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to AI. The important thing is to be open to different ideas, to be willing to experiment and to collaborate. And of course, to keep in mind that, like, ultimately, we want AI to benefit everyone.
I love that. It's like a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping the future of AI. It's not just about like the technology itself. It's about how we use it, the values we embed in it.
Absolutely. It's a huge responsibility, and it's one that we all share.
Well, this has been an incredible conversation. I feel like I've learned so much about, like, not just the challenges of AI, but also the incredible possibilities. And DAI, it's definitely something I'm going to be thinking about a lot.
Me too. It's such a, like, rapidly evolving field. It's hard to predict what the future holds, but that's also what makes it so exciting.
You know, right? And to all our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of AI. Remember, the future isn't something that just like happens to us. We all have a say in it. So stay curious, keep asking questions, and let's build the kind of AI-powered future that we all want to see.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And that's a wrap for today, folks. Until next time, stay tuned.